Have you ever dreamed of a quiet place to escape the hustle and bustle of life? That's what I thought when I bought my little cabin on Lake Harrison. But on my very first day, I walked straight into a nightmare. "You can't just waltz in here and claim that dock." Those were the first words she yelled, before I even knew her name. I'd barely set down my moving boxes when she stormed across my lawn like she owned the whole neighborhood, ranting about community rules and access rights. No hello, no welcome, just pure entitlement. And the way her clipboard-carrying posse followed her, something was definitely off. Have you ever met a neighbor like that on day one? Drop your story in the comments below. I'd love to hear it. I'm 38, burned out from 3 years managing logistics for a shipping company. I needed a weekend retreat, and this cabin seemed perfect. Weathered cedar walls, a stone fireplace, and best of all, a private wooden dock stretching 50 feet into the crystal-clear waters of Lake Harrison. I saw it on a crisp Tuesday afternoon in late September, and knew it was the one. The paperwork was clean, the inspection flawless, and I closed the deal 3 weeks later with my retirement savings. It felt like my first smart move in years. Moving day started at 7 a.m., and I was optimistic unloading boxes onto the porch. The air smelled of pine needles and lake water, exactly what I needed after years of stale office air. I'd just carried my first load inside when I heard voices from my dock. Peeking through the kitchen window, I saw 3 people strolling on my pier like they owned it. A woman in her 50s with perfectly styled blonde hair led the pack, waving laminated papers and gesturing dramatically at the water. Behind her, a stocky man in khakis and a polo shirt scribbled notes, nodding along. A third person trailed behind. I figured they might be neighbors saying hello, but their body language said otherwise. I stepped outside, still in my old moving clothes, unprepared for what was coming. The woman spotted me and marched up the hill with a stride that spelled trouble. "You must be the new owner," she called, her tone far from friendly. "I'm Victoria Hale, president of the Lakeview Shores Homeowners Association, and we need to discuss your dock situation now." The man introduced himself as Clark Benson, HOA enforcement officer, with a smug grin that said he was enjoying this. The third was another board member whose name I forgot because I was too busy figuring out what they wanted. Victoria skipped pleasantries. She flipped through her papers and launched into a speech about community dock access and shared marina resources. According to her, my private dock was community property under HOA rules, and I had to surrender control immediately for their new marina pass system. "We're selling seasonal dock passes for $200 each," she said, as if it made perfect sense. "Your dock is the main marina access, so remove any private property signs and let residents use it freely." Clark added that non-compliance meant daily fines starting at $50 and climbing. I couldn't believe my ears, but I stayed quiet and let them talk. Victoria got more agitated as I listened silently, shuffling through blurry photocopied papers. When she finished, she stared at me. "So, what's your answer?" she asked with a smirk. I looked from her to Clark, then at the fuzzy documents. "Can you show me the deed proving this dock belongs to the HOA?" I asked calmly. Victoria's face shifted, and she rambled about covenant interpretations instead of showing legal proof. Clark tried to intimidate me with talk of inspections and violations, but I kept asking the same question. I wasn't trying to be difficult. I'd just spent a fortune on this place and wasn't handing it over based on photocopies and threats. It felt like I'd stepped into a bizarre world where strangers could demand your property. I pulled out my phone and started recording, which made them visibly uncomfortable. Victoria's voice grew louder as they left, but I couldn't catch her words. Standing on my porch, I tried to process it all. I reached into my pocket and felt the old brass key the previous owner gave me at closing. "You'll figure out what it opens," he'd said with a sly smile, but I'd been too focused on paperwork to ask more. The next morning at 6:30 a.m., Clark was on my porch with papers, dressed like he was heading to a board meeting, tie, dress shoes, ridiculous for dawn at a lake. I cracked the door to take his documents and he launched into a speech about violation notices and inspections. "These citations are effective immediately," he declared, acting like a sheriff instead of an HOA bully. Over the next few days, the community vibe shifted. Neighbors avoided eye contact. I'd see them chatting on porches, stopping when I appeared. Victoria was spreading her version of events, and it was working. I felt like an outsider. It was like high school, except the mean kids had grown up and gained authority. I decided to explore my property, following survey markers from my deed. Near the water's edge, hidden under weeds, I found a rusty metal post with carved symbols matching my brass key. I cleared years of vines to see it clearly, and it lined up perfectly with my dock. I snapped photos from every angle, noting GPS coordinates. That afternoon, I visited Harold, the neighbor who sold me his fishing boat. He'd likely seen the whole showdown from his garden. Harold shared bits and pieces like he was testing me. He said the HOA had been redefining property lines for years, claiming private docks as community assets to charge extra fees. Things were clear back in the day, he said, but when Frank sold, Victoria saw her chance. Frank, the previous owner, owned the entire marina, not just my dock. Victoria was frustrated by his refusal to cooperate, and I was her new target. This wasn't about rules, it was about control. Thursday afternoon, a community meeting notice arrived in my mailbox, printed on official letterhead with my name under property violations. Victoria had organized a public showdown. At the meeting, Victoria opened with theatrical authority, reading a statement about community cooperation and shared resources. She painted me as a selfish resident, listing alleged violations. Her main claim was that my dock blocked marina access, despite other access points nearby. An older man worried about property values if owners blocked community amenities, but couldn't explain how my dock became one. It felt rehearsed, like Victoria had coached them. I noticed Clark filming me from the back, but I kept my face blank. When my turn came, I said, "If this dock is community property, show me the original deed and survey proving it. Otherwise, this is pointless." I gathered my papers and left, knowing I'd hit a nerve. Driving home, I wondered if I was fighting a losing battle. Victoria had allies, and her HOA position gave her control over the narrative. But her refusal to show real documents told me I was on the right track. That night, I heard footsteps on my porch. I thought it was an animal or a branch, but then a paper slid under my door. I waited, half expecting trouble, before checking. It was a folded note in block letters. Sell or leave. My blood ran cold. The next morning, one of my tires was slashed. The sheriff who responded seemed more interested in the HOA dispute than the vandalism. He suggested property conflicts could escalate and that I should resolve the dock issue. His attitude implied Victoria's story had reached him through back channels. I returned home overwhelmed, feeling like a coordinated campaign was pushing me out. I nearly called a realtor to sell, but then I remembered my dad's advice about workplace bullies. Documentation beats confrontation every time. Instead of running, I fought back with facts. Friday morning, I called my college friend, a lawyer, and asked him to review my property documents. The brass key felt heavier, and the boundary marker symbols started making sense. I took another photo of the lake, focusing on GPS coordinates and the line between my dock and the marker. Victoria was hiding something, and I was getting closer. That weekend, I hosted a barbecue on my dock, inviting every resident except Victoria and Clark. I made flyers with copies of my property boundaries and delivered them to every cabin but theirs. Guests arrived around 6 p.m. Fords, led by Megan Price, a single mom from a small cabin near the entrance. She was struggling to raise 2 kids, and the HOA's marina fees would have hit her hard. The barbecue was a hit. Great food, music, and a warm vibe that reminded me why I moved here. People asked about the dock's history, and I shared what Harold and my lawyer found about the original marina plans. Residents started comparing notes on the HOA's shady finances, questioning Victoria's use of community funds. Around 9 p.m., Clark appeared at my property's edge, hiding behind trees, snapping photos and typing on his phone, likely logging violations. Neighbors noticed too. As he turned to leave, Harold handed him a community email from Victoria announcing a mandatory inspection tomorrow at 8 a.m., targeting unauthorized gatherings and waterfront safety violations. The timing was no coincidence. Harold whispered to me, "Check the deeds again." Frank left more than just docks. Monday morning was gray and drizzly. The final HOA meeting was in their office, where Victoria presented with confidence, citing her authority in community safety. She showed blurry photocopies of legal sources, quoting property law and regulations to back her claim. It was an impressive show, but none of her papers had official seals. When I asked for the original bylaws, she refused. Her lawyer presented a threatening letter about property seizure and fines. I asked for specific legal authority allowing the HOA to take my dock, but Victoria pivoted to vague talk of eminent domain. It felt like a bluff to scare me into submission, but the threat of a lawsuit showed this was serious. My turn came. I showed my original deed and my lawyer's title search, proving my property included exclusive marina access, established decades before Victoria's HOA. When she interrupted with covenant talk, I calmly noted that recorded easements trump HOA rules in every state. The strongest moment was displaying my waterline survey, showing my exact access boundaries. My evidence was clear, but Victoria was already planning her next move. The final meeting was the next weekend, outdoors on the community green by the lake. More residents showed up than ever, curious about the outcome. Victoria, with her lawyer and briefcases, announced this was the community's last chance to approve the marina pass and sue me if I didn't comply. I stood on my dock, visible to all. "Before I address your threats," I said, looking at Victoria, then the crowd, "a simple question. Does your claim to this dock include the submerged land beneath it?" Victoria looked nervous. Her lawyer stayed blank. I continued, holding up the original marina insurance policy stating the HOA was a tenant organization with no ownership over the marina's infrastructure. Victoria's face paled as I read aloud, and her lawyer scrambled through his papers. The crowd erupted. Megan thanked me for bringing transparency. Residents demanded answers about the HOA's marina fees, and Victoria went silent. Clark claimed my easement documents were fake, but his accusation was so absurd that people laughed. Even Victoria looked embarrassed. I offered certified copies of my documents to anyone and suggested new leadership. The crowd's anger turned to action. A motion to suspend Victoria and Clark and audit the HOA's finances passed unanimously. Weeks later, investigations revealed Victoria owed $90,000 for unauthorized spending. Clark faced charges for harassment and vandalism traced to him. Their lawyer quit, claiming he was misled. Harold was elected interim HOA president, launching a full audit and transparent practices respecting the marina's history and residents' needs. 6 months later, the marina ran smoothly. A volunteer maintenance program made lake access affordable, and the community felt united. I finally enjoyed my dock in peace, knowing I'd stood up for what's right and helped build a better neighborhood. But that's another story, and it might get wilder. Thanks for listening, folks. If you enjoyed this, please hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell for more true stories like this. Share your own HOA or neighbor tales in the comments. I'll read every one. See you next time.